Welcome to Industry on Blast, the podcast that takes you on a thrilling journey into the hidden depths of secrets, deception, and untold stories. Hosted by Dr. Marlene Carson, a fearless advocate and survivor, this show is your gateway to the shocking truths and captivating narratives that lie beneath the surface. Get ready to unveil the secrets of the industry and hear from special guests who have experienced it firsthand. This is Industry on Blast.
Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to Industry on Blast. I am your host, Dr. Marlene Carson, and I'm really excited that you decided to join us today. Today, we're going to have some critical conversations regarding the anti-trafficking space. And I'm very honored and pleased to have on as our guest today, my esteemed colleague. And I mean, she's just an amazing, amazing woman. I love her so much. Dr. Jacquelyn Meshelemiah. Please welcome to the stage.
Thank you for having me, Dr. Carson.
Oh my gosh.
To be here today.
I'm very excited that you had the opportunity to join us today. I'm going to jump right in here because first, tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Jacquelyn. How did you get into the anti-trafficking space and what made you interested in the anti-trafficking movement?
Sure. Well, all of this started in 1996 when I was working at the SUNY Buffalo in the School of Social Work. In the 90s, we didn't have the term human trafficking per se in the United States, but it was obviously happening. But what was going on in Buffalo at the time, there were a number of incidents where community members were being accosted by men driving up and down the street they assumed was a stroll to pick up women who they thought were selling sex. And they were leaving needles behind people's homes and alleyways like garbage cans. So the Buffalo Police Department, the Department of Justice, and the School of Social Work did this three-pronged research project trying to understand what was going on. And so as a researcher, I was brought on to develop some survey tools to interview Johns who had all been arrested and was being charged to go to John school. We were interviewing women who had been out in the streets, and we were interviewing community members about their perception of how prevalent prostitution was at the time. And as a researcher, I wanted to do my due diligence. So I wanted to talk to women who had been charged with prostitution, including those who are no longer in the streets, but wanted to educate people. And in doing that, I met lots of women who educated me and my colleagues about how to develop a proper tool that was inclusive and accurate. But in particular, I met a young lady who was 2 years younger than me at the time, a Black woman. And I had gone to school for 10 years and earned 3 degrees, and she had been in the street for 10 years being exploited. And so I immediately identified with this young Black woman who was just 2 years younger than me. And she talked about the typical story we've all heard, these young Black girls meeting these men, calling them their boyfriends, being told and tricked into believing this guy cared about them, ultimately started to verbally and emotionally abuse her, onto physical abuse of her, and then the sexual abuse. And before you know it, she was being sold to his friends, his boys, his cousins, or whoever it was, to pay her share of the rent. But what happened in particular was she told the story about how they were starting to record her with the big camcorders on the shoulder at the time.
Wow.
And I was thinking, oh my goodness, he is setting her up to blackmail her, to use this against her, to weaponize this against her. And she stopped and she paused and she turned sideways and started to cry. And I call her Queen. And as she was crying with her head, like looking up to the ceiling, she started talking about this experience. You've heard me talk about this, Dr. Carson, about being forced to have sex with dogs. And I remember sitting in that room, sitting in that room and saying, I've never in my life heard of Black women having sex with dogs, teenagers having sex with dogs. We know that zoophilia is a real clinical diagnosis when it involves this urge to have sex with dogs. It's a very rare phenom, rarely diagnosed in the human population. And to hear that there was a Black girl doing this in Buffalo, New York, this is not zoophilia. This is exploitation. This is not zoophilia. She was forced to do this against her will. And I knew there was a difference. And I said to myself, Dr. Carson, that if this is happening in Buffalo, New York, it's happening elsewhere in this country. And if it's happening in the good old United States, it is happening around the world. And since then, I have read stories of it happening in other places. And I've talked to survivors of sex trafficking to say, I heard your story. And
Mhm.
oh my goodness, I had planned to go to my grave with that shame. I thought I was the only one. And
Mm.
that's why I do that work. I'm not going to allow women's lives to be perverted and made to be normal when it's abnormal. This
Mhm.
behavior, exploitation of women and girls, is not normal behavior. It is not something in the DSM-5 that we should normalize and say
Right.
that we're willing, these women are victims. And that is why I stay in this work.
Wow. I've heard a lot of stories, of course. I was not expecting you to say anything like that.
Nor was I expecting to hear it the first time I heard it, Dr. Carson. So
My
she
God.
changed my life. This person who I now call Queen changed my life and gave me a whole different view of how perverse society can be and how we can marginalize people we throw away in society. She
You
changed
know,
the course
if
of my
Queen
entire career.
ever sees this podcast, I want to say two things. First, I am extremely sorry that something like this would happen to you, to Queen. She is, in fact, a queen. And secondly, I have to thank you for sharing it with Dr. Jacquelyn and changing, I'm sure, the trajectory of her life that has put her on the path to help us all. Because that's to share some, I, as a survivor of trafficking myself, there are certain things you plan on taking to the grave. You know what I'm saying? You just plan, you will never ever tell it. There are things that happen in my life that I will never ever tell. And so she had to be bold and courageous to begin to be that vulnerable to share those parts of her story. And we, as survivors, because of you, Queen, changing Dr. Jacquelyn's life, we are forever grateful.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
Dr. Carson,
Wow.
you made a very good point when you said that because we cannot hear these horrible life experiences and
Mm.
go on about our business. It is not acceptable. This is deplorable. And the victimization that women and girls continue to be subjected to in this society is unacceptable. There's
It
no
is. And now we're seeing it with boys. I mean, and it
way.
just didn't start, but it's happening with boys and men. I sit on the U.S. Advisory Council on trafficking, and there are males that are telling me things I never heard.
It's
I
true.
mean, I have been blown away by their stories, and like we have to create a place and a safe space for them to share their stories as well,
We do.
because this just
Absolutely.
happens to people. You know what I mean? It happens to people. Doesn't matter if it's male or female. And the fact of the matter is, it should not be happening.
There you go.
It
And
should
that's what
not
it
be
comes down
happening.
to.
Wow. You also mentioned John School. And just for our audience who may not know what a John School is, I remember the first time I participated in a John School, I was actually appalled. I was appalled over the fact that these men who had been buying sex from victims came to a free John School, took up my time, a police officer's time, a nurse's time, the system's time to educate them on the dangers of buying commercial sex. But for the sake of our audience, will you please describe what is John School?
Sure. I like the part too, Dr. Carson. You said that the dangers of or the
Yeah,
consequences is all about them, right? But anyway,
that's what I'm saying. How is it about them? But
how is it about
right.
them? But on John Schools, it takes a number of formats. It could be an entire weekend, it can be 8 hours, it can be a half a day, it can be a week. But the John School that I was involved in was from a Friday to a Sunday John School program where these men were diverted out of the system, out of incarceration, out of carceral control to this weekend, this pass. You go, you pass the jail option, you get socialized to treat women differently, to keep
Oh
yourself
my
free of
goodness.
these disease infected women, and to just be safe, good citizens. Basically, it helps them to get a pass.
My
for
God.
exploiting people who are in the streets or whatever form they're out there being prostituted. And so, in exchange for coming to the program for the weekend, they talk to a law enforcement officer, they talk to social workers, talk to women who've been in the street before, who they labeled at the time prostitutes, talk to healthcare providers. In exchange for this 48-hour experience, they're going to given a slap on their hand and told not to do it again.
Oh my God. So they have a John School for buyers. What do they have, Dr. Jacquelyn, for the victims?
You know, we've had this discussion about the whole Jane programs versus the John schools. And I do agree that women who are subjected to trafficking need more than 48 hours of whatever it's going to take.
Absolutely.
They need lifelong services to sustain them and to rebuild them and help them to live a life of decency with integrity. And so there are some options out there. We know there are survivor-led organizations that at least give people a place to lay their heads as a starting point. We know that housing is a really big issue that sometimes even results in people being trafficked in the first place by needing somewhere to stay. So in terms of the number of people who are being trafficked versus actual programs established just for traffic survivors, is a big disconnection between the two. The survivors, and I don't know the numbers, we have no one really know the numbers per se, but we know there's an incongruency between people who need services and those who are actually getting services. Again, there are some survivor-led organizations. There are organizations that offer services around addiction, offer services around exploitation sexually, and around services around mental health. But it's very difficult to find a one-stop shop that addresses the multiple forms of violence that these people are subjected to, that they can find in one place that will allow them to stay for months to years at a time to rebuild their lives. There isn't nearly enough beds for minors nor adults, males or females, or members of the trans community to find a safe haven.
So you talked about the beds that are needed. Do you know of any program in our country that specifically supports victims of color?
Color. Wow.
We've actually looked and we can't find one that houses specifically victims of color. Because would you agree that victims of color come from different disparities, have a different experience? So I'm not saying we can't put victims of color in other programs, but the reality of it is those programs need to be educated on supporting victims of color. And, you know, we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, but are we really implementing diversity? So when it comes to housing, I understand victims that don't want to go to some of these programs. I totally get it. But do you know of any programs?
I do not know of a single program. And we know that disproportionately, Black, Indigenous people of color, especially Black women, are disproportionately arrested, jailed, incarcerated, victimized when it comes to trafficking. Yet, there are no specific services like in housing, residential, long-term for victims, although we know the numbers.
Wow. I mean, that's like mind-boggling, because the reality of it is, you know, they have coined the terms modern day slavery. Well, I have a whole nother something about that too. But if it is modern day slavery, why are there not programs for the modern day slave?
Well, if there was a will, there would be a way. Quite honestly, Dr. Carson, I think that we throw away people in this society on a regular basis. Let's start with the whole notion of Black and brown girls being seen as little women. This whole adultification bias is real. There's been research done by my colleagues around adultification bias, Epstein et al., and some others, that looks at the numbers around how people view literally Black girls as little women and subsequently treat them accordingly in the educational system, in child welfare system, in the criminal justice system. And so if these children are viewed as women, they're going to be held to a higher standard and therefore penalized at a higher standard and not seen as the perfect victim or innocent, but instead viewed as active agents of their own victimization.
My
And
goodness.
that's the way we see racialized people in this country, especially including when they're being commercially exploited.
It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. And I think that the systems, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's social services, whether it's our government, the system needs to, they have a campaign with one of the big agencies in our country, and it says, look beneath the surface, right? Well, I think they need to stop looking beneath the surface and look at the surface.
I love that.
Because it's right in our face.
I love that.
It's not like human trafficking in your backyard. No, it's at your front door. It's knocking at your front door. And we specifically, as people of color, are saying, open the door and let us get the help and the services that we need. When we think about, and we'll talk about this, we're going to take a break in just a minute, but let me just say this. When we think about even the victims that you and I are talking about, the white paper that we just did, but the victims that just need counseling, that just need social services and don't have accessibility, that is horrific. And that should not be today in 2023 in our country. We'll take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the services that victims of trafficking need.
Stay tuned for more jaw-dropping revelations and captivating stories. Industry on Blast will be right back, ready to uncover the secrets of the industry that would leave you speechless. Don't miss a moment. Thank you for listening to Industry on Blast. We'll be back shortly with more eye-opening discussions, incredible stories, and inspiring guests. Your journey into the depths of the industry continues soon.
Welcome back to Industry on Blast. I am your host, Dr. Marlene Carson, and today we're talking to Dr. Jacquelyn Meshelemiah, who is a scholarly activist. I want you to talk about a little bit about what that means, but wow, whenever I have these conversations, specifically with you, my blood pressure is just like off the Richter scale right now, because I get so angry and upset about why is this happening to people of color, to little brown girls and boys. We don't get Amber Alerts. People don't know we're missing. People don't, even then when we return, we don't get the services, the counseling, the support that's needed to get lives back.
I agree. Dr. Carson, I understand your blood pressure rising. It makes mine rise as well. Excuse me. Let me talk to you a little bit about that, what you're just saying. Let me start with that terminology that I use to identify with. Okay. A scholar activist. I am an individual with a doctoral degree, and we know that in the United States, just 2% of the population holds that doctoral degree over age 25. So it's a very small contingency of us who hold this degree. And so with this degree comes quite a bit of privileges. And as a scholar activist, I intend to exhaust my privilege. And so what that means is I intentionally, actively intersect my research, teaching, and service in a way to promote social justice.
Yes.
I have a responsibility to use my intellect, my platform, my opportunities to elevate the voices of those that have been marginalized to the periphery. With that said, then, I have chosen to commit to amplifying social justice issues, in particular around trafficking, because we know that trafficking is not something new. It continues to be reinvented. It happens in different forms, and it disproportionately affects people that look like you and I. It's as simple as that. And it continues to prosper because it's beneficial. People benefit from the exploitation of BIPOC people, especially Black and brown people, men, women, and children. That's just the reality of what it is. And so you said it raises your blood pressure. As a scholar activist, it raises my blood pressure too. And I just am so thankful that I have the platform to talk about something that means something. There's no point in me being a scholar and a university professor and researcher and not do research that can translate to changing policies, practices, and
Yes.
even perceptions of issues that are affecting us or people around us each and every day. So when it comes to trafficking, we know that people who are in these precarious positions are in these precarious positions because they're being oppressed in a number of ways based on a number of identities. And we know that there's been a number of studies done around, well, what do these individuals need? First of all, they need protection. We got laws in place that still do not protect BIPOC people. Let's talk about that. We know that we have the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. We have laws across the 50 states, all talking about protecting trafficked individuals. The whole protection, prevention, partnership, and it's the last, prosecution. We know this is out there. We know these 4 thrusts are out there. But what the problem is, they're not being appropriately applied to BIPOC people. And so if the prosecution is supposed to be to take on the traffickers and bring them down, then why has it been used against the victims? Why are they in the systems? Why are they under the carceral care of these systems? And so what I've learned is the laws don't equally apply nor benefit nor protect us. And when it comes to trafficked people, we throw them away and we blame them. We find everything we can to blame them for why they're in those circumstances. Never mind the adverse childhood experiences, never mind the oppression and the systems they were put in that further oppressed them, made them more vulnerable. But look at what you said. We keep saying look beneath the surface. No, let's look at the surface. Look at people for who they are in those situations that started way back in childhood, that continues to go into adulthood, that we're doing nothing about over this entire lifespan.
I think when we're looking beneath the surface, we have the ability to take a look and hide our hand. So that makes us feel less responsible for doing something, for taking accountability for what we just saw. I don't understand how people, whether it be government, whoever, how can you look and know that people are being victimized, children's innocence is being taken, and you hide beneath the rock? I just don't get it. I really don't get it. But we only have a few minutes left, and I want to jump into our recent project that we just done. We completed what we call a white paper. I want you to explain to our audience, what is a white paper? What is the significance of a white paper? And what was the purpose of the white paper that you first of all, let me say this. Thank you for locking arms with us and giving us what we needed, because I just have to tell this. I remember going to, can I say your university name or no? It doesn't matter. So I remember going to a specific university, and we were just starting in the anti-trafficking space. Nobody in Ohio was really doing anything. And I asked, could they come alongside and help us create programming for victims of trafficking? I promised the guy on the other line laughed at me. He said, ma'am, you're not going to find anybody here that's working with traffic victims. And I had a house full of them, okay, on the campus of the university. So no, we have to find somebody to help us. And so that went on probably for 2 years. We ended up getting some people that was helping us. But to know that you were right upstairs while all this was going on, I literally felt like the system was keeping us apart. So we wouldn't come together. You know, they look at us as angry Black women anyhow. I'm just going to say it. You know, it's my show. I can do what I want to say.
Oh, it's true.
But that's how they look at us. And so knowing that the system was keeping us apart, which ultimately could affect our impact. So I am absolutely grateful for having you as part of our team. You bringing that credibility, because I don't care how many initials and letters is behind our name. Sometimes they still treat us, you're still the Black prostitute. Okay. And there's a lot of us, our whole team is comprised of survivors. So to have you to come alongside is absolutely, our hearts are grateful. We're just grateful for you. Absolutely. So let's talk about, Jacquelyn, the white paper.
All right. And so thank you, Dr. Carson, for even inviting me to be part of the team. This is what I call real research, where it's really participatory, it's community-based, and it's survivor-led. And that is the best way to do this type of research. You know, when you invited me to be part of this opportunity through the Ohio Developmental Disability Conference Council, ODDC, I was really, you know, excited because I knew that if I was working with you all, the real experts here, we could dig deep and come up with a rich research project to get at this, what we call this white paper. White papers are designed to give a in-depth overview of a topic. In this case, racialized women with disabilities with lived experiences, trafficked people. And so this has not been done, obviously. All these identities and their intersection all being examined concurrently at one time. And so we needed to create this white paper that talked about these differing moving identities and this dynamic interaction between them and how all of them converge and result in this space in which these women are forced to exist and to persist. So this white paper had two pieces to it. One, developing the tool, getting it approved through the university, the IRB process, and actually doing the data collection and doing a deep dive into the literature. So we did a deep dive into the literature and a deep dive into this research project whereby we interviewed 20 BIPOC women. And this 20 is pretty important to state because there are some people who do these studies and they can't even access 15 women with a large grant and a large team of people, because we know that Black women and BIPOC women, when we're oppressed and we're victimized, we don't always report for obvious reasons.
Right.
So, you know, we're very hidden, so to speak, in terms of getting our stories and our lives, you know, given the proper attention.
Yeah.
This white paper allowed us to take a deep dive into the literature as well as interview these women around their adverse childhood experiences, around their developmental disabilities as children, their individual education plans, IEPs put in place for children, their subsequent special education classes, their involvement with the criminal justice system, either as minors or adults, their involvement in child welfare system, the type of services they have accessed over their entire lifetimes versus in the last 30 days, as well as looking at their perception of discrimination and racism, even in the anti-trafficking movement. We wanted to cover it all because it really is important to really look at the entire picture of what's going on. If we continue to do our research in silos and look at this one little piece and that little piece, we can't get the full picture.
Right.
It was really important to me while working with you all that I truly helped to give a big picture of the lifespan experience of BIPOC women with disabilities who have lived experiences. We can't continue to say, oh, it's just one bad decision. They chose to do drugs or they whatever. That's not what it is. It is much more complex. The lived experience of someone with disabilities who is racialized with a sex trafficking history is complex. And we need to put a pin drop there and leave it as such. It is complex. There's not one single explanation or one single solution. We need a comprehensive approach to helping these women rebuild their lives.
Yeah. You know, I was very honored again to work with you and the team of educators that came alongside and helped to get this project done. The thing for me about working with the victims is knowing what happens next. We have this white paper done. And if you would like a copy of the white paper, it will be on our website at www.blastmovement.org. So you can get your copy there. But I just, it took a lot of work for us to even get that far, right? From what I understand, this is the first white paper done on Black, Indigenous, people of color, BIPOC. And so with disabilities, that's huge. But now what's next? So we cannot leave it at that. You know what I'm saying? So my hope is that if you're watching this podcast and you have an interest, you have resources, you want to give to projects like this, reach out to us, because the fact of the matter is we cannot leave people. We can't look beneath the surface. We can't know and just hide our hand. We have a responsibility for helping these women get their life back. As for me, as a survivor of trafficking, I'm telling you, I'm grateful to God, my community, my family that have come alongside and helped me walk through the processes to get my life back. And I need you all to help us help some other women get their life back as well. The other thing is, we did this just in our county. This needs to be done. Jacquelyn, I want you to talk to that. This needs to be done around the country. Do you agree?
Absolutely. You know, the example I just told you about Queen in Buffalo, New York. And I told you since then, since 1996, I found examples right here in the city of Columbus. I've seen it online in other parts of the world. And so just like I mentioned, if it was possible and it was occurring there, it was happening elsewhere, we need to get a temperature around the country of the experiences, the complete holistic experience of BIPOC women who are have histories of trafficking as well as disabilities. And that's a really important piece because oftentimes, as we saw in our research, many of these women end up with records. Number have been arrested, number have been in jail, number have been in prison. And we can't just connect that further victimization by the system because they were not seen as victims and how that compounds their victimization. That polyvictimization over a period of time leads to complex post-traumatic stress disorder and a number of mental and physical disorders. Even in our study, the women suffer from a number of major physical disorders that we haven't even touched upon. So we do need to look across the country, see how prevalent it is, how it manifests itself, and how we, as a country in these 50 states with these 50 laws, can truly address the issues of this population and give them a little bit of that safety net that's afforded to Americans in this country and even foreigners who come to this country. All of us deserve a piece of that safety net. All of us.
We all deserve a piece of that safety net. Dr. Jacquelyn, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Our time is up. I'm sure we can go on and on and on about this conversation, but our time is up. So I just want to thank you so much for the work that you do, how you've impacted the survivor community, and how we together will impact this world. Thank you, Dr. Jacquelyn. Oh, one last question. Oh my God, how can I forget that? Ask this question. What part of this industry would you like to put on blast? Of the human trafficking industry, would you like to put on blast?
I would like to put the entire anti-trafficking community on blast for its disregard for race and ethnicity, the exclusion of racialized women from the safety net, the identification, the uplifting, and the inclusion of them as victims. It is a travesty that we cannot get past race, ethnicity, skin color, hair texture, body build, and treat all humans as humans. An industry as important as the anti-trafficking industry must be inclusive, must be compassionate, must be kind, and must look at the individuals right before each and every one of us and include them in our efforts, in our policies, in our practices, in our procedures and our practices around how we conduct ourselves as scholars, activists, and advocates in the anti-trafficking movement.
Wow. Well, you heard it, Dr. Jacquelyn. Thank you so much. Oh, wow. I just have to take a deep breath there because she put the whole industry on blast. Okay.
We have to do better. We have to do better.
We have to do better. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you to our audience. Again, reach out to us at www.industryonblast.org. I appreciate you all for joining us today. Call us, email us, comment with your questions, concerns, or if any topics that you would like to hear on Industry on Blast, we'll bring it to you. Thank you.
That concludes another mind-blowing episode of Industry on Blast. Thank you for joining us on this riveting exploration of the industry's secrets. Be sure to subscribe and never miss an episode as we continue to unveil the truth. Visit our website at www.blastnetwork.com to catch up on previous episodes and stay connected. If you have a story to share or are interested in becoming a sponsor or guest, we want to hear from you. Together, we can ignite change and create a world free from the shadows. This is Industry on Blast, signing off. Keep shining a light on the truth.